The story begins in a bustling international airport, where passengers move quickly, checking their phones, pulling luggage, and hurrying to their gates. The airport is filled with the usual mix of excitement and routine. Amidst the crowd, Mohamed Salah and his wife arrive, dressed casually, blending in like any other travelers. Their destination? A well-earned vacation, away from the flashing cameras and roaring stadiums. But what should have been a routine security check takes an unexpected turn. As Salah's wife steps forward for screening, an officer's sharp voice cuts through the air. The tone is cold. The demand is shocking. "Ma'am, you need to remove your headscarf." A wave of silence spreads through the passengers nearby. Salah's wife, calm but visibly uncomfortable, politely requests a private screening, a basic right. But the officer refuses. The tension in the air thickens. Salah, usually known for his grace under pressure, takes a step forward. His expression is unreadable, but the look in his eyes says it all. What happens next leaves the officer stunned, and the entire airport speechless. How will Salah handle this? Will he let it go or take a stand? Stay with us to see how his powerful response changes everything. Salah walks through the metal detector without issue. A green light flashes, and the TSA officer barely spares him a glance before waving him forward. Behind him, his wife steps toward the scanner, adjusting the strap of her purse as she moves. She carries herself with quiet confidence, her hijab neatly wrapped, flowing over her shoulders. As she walks through, a sharp beep echoes in the checkpoint area. The TSA officer, standing with his arms crossed, tilts his head slightly. He steps forward. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to remove your headscarf for additional screening." Salah's wife instinctively reaches up, fingers brushing the fabric of her hijab. She exchanges a quick glance with her husband, her expression calm but questioning. "I'd prefer a private screening," she says, her voice composed and polite. The officer exhales sharply, his lips pressing into a thin line. "That won't be necessary," he replies. "Just take it off here." A moment of silence. The steady hum of the airport continues around them, but within this small space, an uncomfortable stillness settles. Salah straightens slightly, his eyes locking onto the officer. His voice remains even, but there's no mistaking the quiet firmness beneath his words. "She has already cleared the scanner. Is there an issue?" "It's standard procedure," the officer says flatly. His gaze flickers between Salah and his wife, as if challenging them to resist. Salah's wife takes a slow breath. "I know my rights," she says, keeping her tone steady. "A female officer can conduct the screening in private." The TSA officer shifts his weight. His fingers tap impatiently against the side of his belt. "Look, we don't have time for this," he says, his voice louder now. "Either you comply, or you don't board." Nearby passengers pause mid-step. Some glance over, sensing the tension. A few exchange quiet whispers. Salah doesn't move, but there's a shift in his presence, an unspoken authority settling over him. He isn't just a football star in this moment. He's a man standing against something wrong. "You're saying she will miss her flight for following TSA guidelines?" His tone is polite, but there's an unmistakable steel beneath it. The officer hesitates. There's a flicker of doubt in his eyes, but he quickly masks it. "Sir, let's not make this difficult." The whispers around them grow louder. More people are paying attention now. A small crowd begins to gather, sensing that something significant is unfolding. Salah's wife remains poised, hands at her sides, waiting. The moment stretches, heavy and charged, and then someone else steps forward, a second TSA officer. "Is there a problem here?" he asks, glancing between them. "She's refusing to comply," the first officer states, his words clipped. The second officer frowns. His gaze lands on Salah's wife, then back at his colleague. "She has a right to request a private screening," he says slowly. A beat of silence. The first officer's jaw tightens. "We don't have time for that," he mutters. Salah takes a measured breath. Then he speaks. "Then make time." The steady hum of announcements and rolling luggage fills the air. Passengers shuffle through security, some chatting, others focused on their phones. Salah has just cleared the metal detector and waits on the other side, watching as his wife steps forward. TSA officer, sternly, "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to remove your headscarf for additional screening." Salah's wife pauses mid-step, her fingers instinctively adjusting her hijab. She glances towards Salah, her expression calm but firm. Salah's wife, politely, "I'd prefer a private screening." TSA officer, scoffing, "That won't be necessary. Just take it off here." The air shifts. A moment ago, this was a routine check, But now, an uncomfortable silence lingers. Nearby passengers slow their steps, sensing the tension. Salah, calmly, but firm. She's already cleared the scanner. Is there an issue? TSA officer, crossing his arms. It's standard procedure. Salah's wife, gently but unwavering. I know my rights. A female officer can conduct the screening in private. The officer exhales sharply, his fingers tapping against his belt in irritation. His voice rises slightly, drawing more attention. TSA officer, look, we don't have time for this. Either you comply or you don't board. A few passengers exchange quiet whispers. Salah doesn't move, but his presence shifts. His expression remains neutral, but his gaze is unyielding. Salah, measured. You're saying she will miss her flight for following TSA guidelines? The officer hesitates, but quickly masks it with forced authority. TSA officer, sir, let's not make this difficult. The crowd around them grows. Some passengers pretend not to listen, but their lingering glances betray their curiosity. The tension tightens like a drawn bowstring. A second TSA officer approaches, drawn by the growing commotion. Second TSA officer, cautious. Is there a problem here? TSA officer, irritated. She's refusing to comply. The second officer frowns, looking from Salah's wife to his colleague. Second TSA officer, she has a right to request a private screening. A beat. The first officer clenches his jaw. TSA officer, grumbling, we don't have time for that. Salah exhales slowly. When he speaks, his voice is quiet, but there's an unmistakable weight behind it. Salah, then make time. The words hang in the air. A moment of stillness before everything shifts. In airport security checkpoint, continuous. A thick silence settles over the checkpoint. The first TSA officer straightens, clearly thrown off by Salah's unwavering stance. More passengers have stopped nearby, their curiosity turning into concern. Some whisper amongst themselves, others discreetly pull out their phones. TSA officer, frustrated, sir, I need you to step aside. You're holding up the line. Salah doesn't move. His posture remains composed, but there's an unspoken authority in the way he holds his ground. Salah, calm, unwavering. No, you're holding up the line. She has the right to request privacy, and you're denying it. The second TSA officer shifts uncomfortably, glancing at his superior before stepping closer to Salah's wife. Second TSA officer, lowering his voice. Ma'am, do you mind waiting over here while we sort this out? Salah's wife nods, stepping aside with grace. Salah remains in place, his steady gaze locked onto the first officer, who is visibly irritated. TSA officer, mocking, you footballers think you're above the rules, huh? A flicker of something unreadable crosses Salah's face. Not anger, not frustration, but something colder. The tension in the room tightened. Salah, measured. I think the rules apply to everyone. That includes you. The crowd murmurs. A businessman in a suit leans toward another traveler. Businessman, whispering, that's Salah, right? The Liverpool guy. Nearby, a young fan in a football jersey tugs at his father's sleeve, eyes widening in recognition. Young fan, excited, whispering, Dad, that's Mohamed Salah. The father places a hand on his son's shoulder, silently watching the situation unfold. The first TSA officer, now aware that more eyes are on him, forces a tight-lipped smirk, but there's unease beneath it. He turns to the second officer, voice clipped. TSA officer, call the supervisor. The second officer hesitates, then nods and steps away to make the call. The first officer turns back to Salah and his wife, arms crossed. TSA officer, condescending. You could have just taken it off. Would have been quicker. Salah says nothing. He doesn't need to. His silence speaks louder than any argument. A few seconds later, a new voice cuts through the air. TSA supervisor, authoritative. What's going on here? The crowd parts slightly as a TSA supervisor, a man in his 50s with sharp eyes, steps forward. His gaze lands on Salah, and the realization hits instantly. TSA supervisor, taken aback. Wait, Mr. Salah? A hush falls over the crowd. The first officer's confidence falters. Salah remains still, his expression unreadable. But the shift in power is undeniable. The moment has changed, and the officer knows it. The TSA supervisor takes a step forward, his eyes flickering between Salah, his wife, and the first officer. The tension in the air is thick, the hushed whispers from the crowd only adding to the weight of the moment. TSA supervisor, firm, but measured. Can someone explain what's happening here? The first TSA officer clears his throat, straightening his posture, trying to mask his unease. TSA officer, standard security check, sir. She refused to comply. Salah exhales quietly, shaking his head just slightly. He doesn't need to argue. The truth is already unraveling itself. TSA supervisor, sharply, refused to comply. His gaze shifts to Salah's wife, who stands calmly beside her husband. Salah's wife, graceful, but firm. I requested a private screening with a female officer. The TSA supervisor's face darkens. His tone changes, no longer just firm, but corrective. TSA supervisor, to the first officer. That's TSA policy. She has every right to request that. A beat. The first TSA officer's jaw tightens. He knows he's made a mistake, but now all eyes are on him. Passengers, staff, even the other TSA officer. There's no easy way out. The TSA supervisor turns back to Salah and his wife, his posture softening slightly. TSA supervisor, apologetic. I deeply apologize for the misunderstanding. I assure you this is not how we conduct security checks. The first TSA officer shifts uncomfortably, his earlier arrogance replaced with quiet regret. He looks at Salah, but Salah doesn't acknowledge him, not out of anger, but because the moment no longer belongs to the officer. Instead, Salah turns to his wife, giving her a slight nod. She returns it, then calmly follows a female TSA officer into a private screening area. The crowd watches in stunned silence. The tension that had filled the space moments ago has dissipated, but a heavy lesson lingers in the air. Respect should never be optional. Salah looks at the first officer, his voice calm, steady, but carrying undeniable weight. Salah, respect should never depend on who someone is. It's a right for everyone. A flicker of something crosses the officer's face. Shame, maybe even understanding. But Salah has already moved on. Salah takes a step forward, his posture relaxed yet commanding. The crowd subtly shifts, giving him space, some still whispering in awe. The situation is over, but the impact remains. The TSA supervisor exhales, watching as Salah walks away. He turns sharply to the first officer, voice low but serious. TSA supervisor, warning, we'll talk about this later. The first officer nods stiffly, knowing there's nothing more he can say. The scene fades as Salah reaches for his wife's bag, waiting patiently for her return. He doesn't look back. He doesn't need to. The moment has already spoken for itself. Salah stands near the exit of the security area, his posture relaxed but his expression unreadable. The murmurs from the gathered passengers continue, though quieter now. A few still glance at him, their eyes filled with admiration and respect. Moments later, the female TSA officer escorts Salah's wife back to his side. She adjusts her hijab with quiet dignity, nodding once to indicate that everything went smoothly. Salah gives her a reassuring look, then turns back toward the security team. The TSA supervisor, still visibly frustrated with the situation, steps forward. TSA supervisor, apologetic. Mr. Salah, on behalf of the TSA, I sincerely apologize for the incident. This should never have happened. Salah listens, his expression calm. He isn't here for revenge, nor does he seek unnecessary conflict. He simply nods once, acknowledging the apology. Salah, measured. Mistakes happen, but respect shouldn't be conditional. A beat. The first TSA officer, standing stiffly to the side, shifts uncomfortably. His earlier authority has dissolved, replaced by quiet regret. He hesitates before speaking. TSA officer, lowering his voice. I didn't mean to disrespect anyone. Salah finally looks at him. There's no anger in his eyes, only a quiet understanding. Salah, intentions matter less than actions. Just do better next time. The first officer nods slightly, absorbing the weight of those words. The small crowd watching the scene unfold remains silent, their faces reflecting a mix of emotions, respect, admiration, and the awareness that they've just witnessed something important. A businessman near the checkpoint, who had been observing from the sidelines, leans toward a fellow traveler. Businessman, whispering, that's why he's not just a footballer. A young fan nearby clutches his phone excitedly, already typing out a post. Young fan grinning to his father. Dad, did you see that? Salah didn't even get angry, he just handled it. The father nods, smiling slightly as he watches Salah and his wife pick up their belongings. Salah places a gentle hand on his wife's back, guiding her toward their gate. They walk away without looking back, their figures disappearing into the crowd. They never needed to raise their voices. Their presence alone was enough to leave an impact. Outside the airport, the sun is beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the tarmac. The moment inside the security checkpoint is already spreading across social media. A video clip, barely a minute long, capturing Salah's composed yet firm response. The caption reads, "Mohamed Salah shows what true respect looks like. Class act." Back inside, the TSA supervisor sighs, rubbing his temples. The first TSA officer remains quiet, staring at the security monitors, lost in thought. He doesn't need to be told. He knows he handled the situation wrong. A final announcement echoes through the airport. Airport announcer VO. Final boarding call for Flight 372 to Dubai. Salah and his wife disappear beyond the gate. The lesson, however, remains long after they're gone. Fade to black. A sleek, modern airport lounge hums with activity. Travelers sip coffee, check their phones, and wait for their flights. Salah and his wife sit near a large window overlooking the runway. She stirs a cup of tea, her expression thoughtful. Salah, relaxed but observant, scrolls through his phone, the soft glow reflecting in his eyes. A notification pops up. Social media post. Mohamed Salah shuts down disrespect at airport security, without saying much at all. Pure class. The post has already gone viral. Thousands of likes, hundreds of comments. The video from earlier is being shared across platforms, replayed over and over again. Some viewers praise Salah's calm reaction. Others express frustration at the officer's behavior. Salah sighs lightly, locking his phone and setting it aside. His wife glances at him. Salah's wife softly. "The spreading, isn't it?" Salah nodding. "It always does." She studies his face, searching for signs of frustration, but finds none. Salah has dealt with moments like this before, on and off the field. He knows the world watches, always ready to judge. But he never lets it define him. Salah's wife. "Do you regret standing your ground?" Salah shakes his head without hesitation. Salah. "No." A comfortable silence settles between them. Outside the window, a plane takes off, rising steadily into the sky. Back at the security checkpoint, the atmosphere is different. The usual rhythm of the airport continues. Passengers passing through, officers checking documents, but there's a noticeable tension among the TSA staff. The first TSA officer sits at a desk, his face tight with frustration. He scrolls through his phone, reading the headlines. News article. Liverpool star Mohamed Salah denied fair treatment at airport security. Fans outraged. His grip tightens around his phone. He hadn't expected this. He thought it was just another interaction, another moment of authority. But now the world was watching and judging. A knock at the door. The TSA supervisor steps in, arms crossed. TSA supervisor, firm. Close the door. The officer swallows hard, knowing what's coming. Hours later, Salah and his wife step outside into the cool night air, the city lights flickering in the distance. Car waits for them at the curb. Salah's wife softly. "Do you think he learned something from this?" Salah opens the car door for her, thinking for a moment before answering. "Salah, that's not up to me." She nods, stepping into the car. Salah follows, closing the door behind them. As the vehicle pulls away from the airport, the moment fades into the background, but the lesson it carried remains.